building a SaaS based on WordPress. We're currently trying to get an app made, and one of the local developers we're talking to have suggested, and given us a quote, to build based on WordPress. At first I was a bit against it, but having done some research and looking into their reasoning, it does sound pretty plausible. I was just wondering if anyone here has built a SaaS web application with WordPress as a backend? The app is used for estimating jobs with some industry-specific trickery. It's essentially a very clever e-commerce site with some CRM features. The company that have quoted it are aware of all of our future possible features, and nothing seems impossible on WordPress. They will be masking all WordPress-specific URLs, custom dashboard, custom login etc. To the paying software user. They won't know it's WordPress. The WordPress backend makes user management, content management etc. really easy and thus cheaper. The thing is, building on WordPress is at the top of our initial budget. Building bespoke is going to add another $15,000 to the build cost, which might delay us for some time. Saving money is no good if the product doesn't work or isn't scalable. As I say though, they are very confident WordPress is a commercially viable route to market. What are your thoughts? WordPress is a lot more than just the plain old lamp these days. I think your prejudice against it might simply be a result of not being technical. I'm sure you can think of something in your area of expertise which the average person would be surprised at its usefulness, assuming you're running a proper progressive web app on your own server and your dev can add in plugins as needed. It sounds like it could be suitable. You can always write your own plugin for the extra functionality. TechCrunch, Zillow and Etsy all run on WordPress, and those have scaled to market pretty well. I can think of 3 major showstoppers. 1, SaaS needs to work offline. 2, you need to store large amounts of data on local devices and it can't be easily split or restricted only to users with supported browsers. 3, you have lots of complex interactive graphics. Think app game. I can't see how any of these would apply to an industry-specific CRM. That's the only real point of concern I can see here. What happens if you run out of money to complete the project when there is a sudden surprise? WordPress is brilliant, but I would suggest going on YouTube or Udemy and learning the basics for yourself, as it will help drastically. Having dealt with devs, I have realized that it starts brilliantly, and it's a big but, most will hold you to ransom with increased costs etc. the closer you get to your milestones and deadlines. You will no doubt have new things come up to add to your milestones that you initially think is enough for an MVP, if you will, and that's where you may get caught out. What I am going to do now is find devs that are interested in an equity share, or get someone that is a dev themselves and be a co-founder. Hopefully that helps, but I am no millionaire or big bucks success yet, lol, just giving you my 2. If you have budget greater than $5,000, I'd strongly recommend talking to. They do this stuff all day. I dealt with them in 2012, went to visit in Ukraine, very proficient. Slavadhoditko will sort you out. From my own experience, several points: modern web apps are basically made of 2 elements, front-end and back-end. Because of mobile native apps etc., front-end has scaled to become everything from iOS or Android apps to Angular-based JS web interface. The point is that WP only gives you one way to manage interactivity on the front end. You'll find it difficult to split the front and back. As a means of getting to market, it might serve you well for a time. However, if you truly wanted to scale or change flows etc., you'd need to separate both flows at some point. One of the primary issues you'll find with WP is that it will be severely limited in API or server-side solutions. Whilst you've got the likes of WP Engine, since it's a PHP application, it's not conducive to being scaled across a fleet of servers, for example. Again, the point is that much of WP's hailed simplicity comes from its ability to combine the front and back-end infrastructure that all web apps require. If you went with a custom back-end, you'd be able to extend the likes of an API or server-side management relatively easily. If you went with WP, this would mean an entire rewrite later down the line, which I guarantee you won't want to do. If you design with WP, you get a WP website. No point beating around the bush. You'll be tired to using WP's internal infrastructure shortcodes etc. This might work for some, but I'll tell you now that it will inhibit you moving forward. It just wasn't designed to be anything other than a blogging platform. It's already painfully slow, has to reload literally every plugin etc. each time. Backend infrastruture memcake, Redis, Elasticsearch is almost unheard of. Designing custom gives you complete control over the flow and marketability of the app. If you've validated the idea, this could be extremely important. If you want me to look over your proposal or brief, I can give an opinion. There are so many MVC frameworks now, Ruby on Rails particularly popular, which wipe the floor with WP any day of the week. You can literally create a shitty e-commerce store in Raw in like 15 minutes, if you're going to be overriding most of WP's functionality anyway. What's the difference between creating a simple system in Raw which you can add to later on? Good luck with that. Why not look for a fixed cost arrangement? That's a joke. The situation is this: those developers you talked to know how to WordPress, so they want you to accept that. And that's it. But WordPress is a blog. It was never designed for SaaS and app stuff or e-commerce stuff, let alone clever e-commerce stuff. Do yourself a favor and find a developer who knows more modern and effective tech. They'd laugh at the idea of making a sophisticated web app on WordPress. They all use tech like Ruby on Rails. Just because you do it a certain way doesn't mean you should. I believe there's a plugin for Chrome that lets you see what websites are made with, see how many SaaS or app websites are made with WordPress. Just because WordPress was originally designed as a blogging platform doesn't mean it is only a blogging platform. It's had hundreds of updates from the developers who see it more than just a blogging platform. I myself am planning to build a small SaaS, with a built-in API. You can add so many bells and whistles to make WordPress look like something you would download on the App Store. Bottom screen navigation, notifications, add to desktop or home screen shortcut prompt, plus built-in lead capture, not to mention, there are 3x as many web devs on Upwork compared to iOS or Android. Yes, and you can also eat cereal using chopsticks. But it's not a matter of can but best. Choosing a platform that was designed from the ground up with SaaS or web apps in mind will result in getting the job done better and faster. Otherwise wouldn't have bothered creating those platforms, and would have stuck with ancient stuff like WordPress too. The keyword here is control. If you are trying to build an MVP, minimal viable product prototype to test your idea, sure, go with WordPress to get up and running. But if you're building a web app that will scale or eventually be something that will be sold or even run long term, I'd go with having it coded instead on its own. WordPress is great, but understand it's built for generic use, so any updates from WordPress can break your app. Hence the need for updating plugins all the time in WordPress. This will be a nightmare if you're trying to scale a software company. When you code your own app, you have control of the source code, updates, etc. Imagine if Facebook had to update their app every time WordPress makes a change. This would be impossible to scale. That being said, some SaaS businesses are built on WordPress, like they've completely rebranded WordPress to look like a SaaS app, but the purpose of the app is building blog-style sites anyways, so it makes sense. Just my thoughts. I've built several apps with developers, so just why I'd recommend the path of coding yourself, especially when any developer now can build something quickly with all the tools and frameworks in any language like Ruby on Rails, PHP, or even lately Node.js. Good luck. WordPress is free and open source, so you can have as much control as you like. Disable the updates, etc., fork it if you want to, and maintain your own version of WordPress. Of course, building from scratch might be cheaper or easier and avoid legacy issues and perhaps have a faster response time. You can get just as much control with Linux and WordPress as you would with Node.js. +1 WordPress only if you want an MVP or validation. If you have validation and you are sure what you want out of the app, go with a custom build that will keep your backend open to any future add-on or improvement. You might want to find another developer, shop around and get multiple quotes. You could even learn how to code yourself. I went down that route and loved it. I think more context is needed. What kind of app? What would it do? Etc. Maybe they recommended it because it's super simple. Granted, I chose to do WordPress because I can do 80% of everything myself. I agree with most of the arguments against that have already been posted. As a software developer myself, I wouldn't consider WordPress as a base for essentially a bespoke product. I've previously been in a similar situation where I was asked to build a bespoke solution on top of a CMS platform, Umbraco if you're interested, and by the end I was pulling my hair out. Initially, it seemed great. There was already a UI built in for managing configuration, and I could just about wrangle the document structure to resemble a proper database. As the project wore on, I felt like I was fighting it, having to hack the core functionality just to get it to work correctly. Instead, I should have been building out functionality. I would say that WordPress is seen by that development company as a golden hammer, essentially something that they think they can use to solve all problems. I would stay away from that type of mentality, as eventually I think your project will begin to be driven more by the limitations of the software platform and not by the features that it needs to be successful. I have Odoo and it gets clunky fast. It's good to prototype and test the market, but scaling is an issue. There is a right way to do it, but very few people are capable. WP runs on PHP. Building in JS is a much better option. WordPress is awesome, but this right here is exactly why I would stray away from building ISAs on WordPress, unless you're just trying to create an MVP to gather interest and test the idea, or some type of multi-site setup like the guys at OnCarrot or Restaurant Engine. If you grow into a successful SaaS, your future development team will have to constantly work around WordPress. Honestly, you can probably build your idea for way less than the $15,000 quoted. I would get more quotes on sites like Upwork. Check out the Lean Startup book too. Trust me, prove your idea first, start small and lean. I burned over $20,000 on my first SaaS business hiring the wrong developers and thinking we needed more than we actually did. What do you think about Django, guys? To be honest, that's a very valid point that I hadn't considered. What if this budget doesn't get to MVP sellable product either by their fault or ours? Not something I'd considered before. Our budget is kind of fluid as our primary business is generating income. But either way, I don't have a lot of money to throw into this. I've spent an hour or so reading some raw tutorials and it does look very clever. I can see that if you know how to code it, you can build this app pretty quickly on this platform. However, I'm not sure I'm cut out for learning it. Sure, I could do the easy tutorials step by step, but I think I'd fall flat on my face when trying to make my app actually do what it needs to do. I kind of feel £15,000 GBP is a lot for what the app is. For a capable freelancer, that's guessing a good 4 to 5 months of wages. Every dev we've spoken to thinks the app will take less than 2 months. Maybe we're looking in the wrong places and need to consider a freelancer. My thoughts at this stage are that we need to build out the sales website and try and get some people signed up on a mailing list to further validate it before spending the big money. I've spoken to a few different people I know in the target industry and they all think it's a good idea, and it given me a few other ideas. For example, my software does everything that's needed for a specific time-consuming task in the industry. In theory we could make the app, copy it into a new app, remove a few features and add a different report template and we have another problem-solving app. I didn't even realize it solved this pain point until someone I was talking to who does this particular job pointed it out. Modifying the second app wouldn't cost too much compared to building the first one but may provide an additional revenue stream and overall lowers the risk a little. Provided the ideas validate. I used to be in this industry as well, so know there is a market for the second app as well. No software on the market for it at the minute. Just spreadsheets or paper documents or over-the-top hard-to-use generic software. Just thinking outside the box a little here. Call me crazy, but has anyone been in this position and employed a developer full-time to work on their own projects? It could work out cheaper in the short run. I guess the employee's concern would be what happens when the apps are finished. I wouldn't want to employ someone to use them and bin them off when we're done. But potentially finding an all-round coder, web tech type person would fit into our existing e-com business once the apps are created. Highly recommend you read this book from 37 Signals also if you haven't, it's free. Helped me a lot. Edit. Also to answer your recent question, we currently have a full-time developer we found on Upwork. He's a full-stack developer so he can handle everything from the back-end to the front-end. We just recently also brought in a front-end developer to help him out. We first hired an agency to build our app and just over $10,000 in we realized we were in trouble. They weren't building what we really needed, communication became an issue, and many other issues. Then we hired a local developer for $100 an hour to take over. We figured his high price per hour meant a better developer. We were wrong again. Another $10,000 or so in we realized he was taking us to the cleaners so to speak, barely making progress and racking up the bill. Eventually we wised up, asked for some help from people who already built successful apps and posted an ad on Upwork. We found our current full-time dev, gave him a test project first to see how he worked before having him full takeover, and he's awesome. We also track everything in Trello and communicate daily with our developer. Whichever route you choose, have small test project first. It can be a smaller feature of your big project. See how you work with them and how well they communicate. This will save you thousands, maybe more. Hope that helps. Hi, can you say a little more about what the application is for? Don't give away any specifics if that's sensitive information, but it would help to know more about what you've got in mind. For some of the reasons already mentioned, WP can be limiting. My biggest concerns would be more to do with the limitations of SQL and PHP when you look at what you could do with something like Raw, Node, or Django. But it also might not be a big deal. You can do some snazzy things these days with WP's new REST API, if you want to use some fancier JS front-end tools. With the right setup you can make it hum as well as any web app will hum. I've got a pretty sweet little setup with Nginx plus FastGear plus Redis which blows the doors off most anything else per unit of server horsepower. It will all depend on what you're looking for here. I wouldn't rule it out just because it's WP, if that's what you're asking. I have read half of that book already, and along with your post and the other posts in this thread, this project may have just got back on track. It's also helped me realize a way to completely solve the biggest and most expensive issue we were struggling with. The whole purpose of my idea is to simplify a process people are doing manually. Software does exist already, but most are completely overkill, complicated and not highly targeted to a specific niche. We have got carried away with making some very clever things happen at MVP when ultimately, they don't need to happen for the app to still be a success in the niche. The bells and whistles can come later when people are giving us money. From doing a small amount of raw research, I really don't think this is a hard app to make at all whatsoever. I think we will give the Upwork route a look. My teammate on this employee of my existing e-com company keeps asking to go this route, but I've kept squashing it. Time to open my eyes. Do you have any advice for finding a quality, reliable coder? WordPress will be a mistake, regardless of whether it'll physically work or not. There is an insider's thread on this project for anyone interested in following it. Hi, there's an insider's progress thread with a little bit more detail, not a lot admittedly, but the app is a relatively simple database app. You add some database entries. It does a little bit of maths and gives you a pretty styled report. It's not going to be the next Facebook or Instagram that sells for billions of dollars. It's just making something certain people, including ours existing customers, do daily, faster and easier. The core app is not complicated at all. I think we've complicated it ourselves by trying to do some trickery to make some more things even easier, without even making the basics work first. I guess that's where the saying "don't run before you can walk" comes in. Do you have evidence of that? Because I don't think they do. Doesn't seem like they do. Runs on it though. You can check, on Chrome, by pressing Ctrl+U. Ctrl+F, search for WP content. Quentin Tarantino did a good job with that movie. Can't wait for his next one, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. About the Manson murders. Well, when you put it like that, it definitely doesn't seem like a 5-figure job, or 2-month job for that matter. That seems like too much. As for what to build it with, I couldn't give an opinion without more details. This is always a challenge, even for companies who look for full-time worker and offer great salary and perks. As a developer myself, I can only tell you what I have encountered when applying for some jobs. Ask to see their previous work. Verify. If you can, give them some test or challenge. Not sure how appropriate it is for one-off work, so not a full-time position, but maybe it can be some sort of implicit test. For example, you may ask as part of application what technology would they recommend and why. Ask other open-ended questions which can reveal you their thought process, and maybe even a level of skill. Such questions are also good because they can't so much figure what you want to hear, but have to come up with their own answers. Have someone look at their code. The fact that an app to be working properly on your phone or computer doesn't guarantee that it was coded well, or that it can deal properly with all possible user inputs etc. as you go along. I guess you can post further questions here. Yes. This. I've seen this scenario before, where features kept getting added before users even had a chance to test the app. And then, they didn't seem to even like the app. Save your money. Make a great basic solution. Then your subscribers can pay for its growth, and you can also ask them, the actual paying customers, which changes and features they'd like to see next. Sometimes you can't even know this until you start using the app. I think I might have gotten mixed up between Etsy and eBay. Obviously they are not running, but with various plugins, plus in Zillow case it is the front plus a.p.i layer, the backend database is separate. There is much more to it than just WordPress. Perhaps I should have said they are all running WordPress plus others. I don't see anything wrong with the idea of building a clone with functionality as an MVP on WordPress. Then just code the extra bits you need as you need them. I don't have a reference, but I do remember a startup saying this is how they saved a large amount of money by building on open source that did 95% rather than building 100%. Unless they are running a hidden security enhancer plugin, that is trivial to install and then you wouldn't be able to tell. Better to run a Stack Explorer. They won't be able to do that on the more basic packages though. A lot of people can confuse, and that's like comparing a Land Rover and Smart Fortwo. Obviously the first has a lot more power and adaptability. I can see how with non-technical client and non-native English-speaking developers there could be some confusion. I think you should use Rockstar, just so you can say you need Rockstar developers or S. Good find recommendations. What's funny is speed tests are giving the site average grades. I'm not sure the actual Zillow site runs on WP, just their agent sites. You can see the WP tag in the source. Yeah, agent site. Hey mate, if you're ready to spend $15,000 at least on your SaaS app, it's not an MVP. WordPress will be good to start fast and test the market, but you will have big problems when you will need to add new features or simply scale the app based on previous experience without even talking about the things that will break after each general update or security update that you don't control. PHP and MySQL will not be a problem. Actually, it's a good choice to go with PHP. There is a lot of developers out there and the LAMP stack is the cheapest. Check this. Always multiply it by 2. They're riddled with optimism bias. As someone that is on their 7th SaaS and did an AMA here, I would strongly suggest you do not build a SaaS on WordPress of all things. Just because something can handle something, doesn't mean it should. Thanks for all of the replies. We've completely refined the MVP and in the process solved a few issues that we had. We're meeting with the developers again on Wednesday, but we've now got a reasonable quote from them to build it on Java plus Bootstrap, which hopefully is a much better way to go. Exciting times. Looks like this project is going to be underway very soon. Here WordPress is mostly a blog platform, and CMS nowadays. A good approach would be to use a framework, for example React for front-end and Laravel for the back-end. Something that runs on WP is different than something that works with WP. With that said, I'd strongly advise you to not run on WP. In FL speak, you'd risk too much control. I've made a lot of miscellaneous little scripts, apps, and web-based tools over the years. Several were specifically for WP. Some started in the hack file before the plugin system was developed. Most are internal only, and I've never finished turning any into a SaaS. One specific data feed system was a standalone system that I eventually made compatible with WP. At the time, there was a big stink about the licensing for WP plugins. Most users thought plugins should have the same license as WP since they required WP to actually function. This played a large role in my best plugin being pirated beyond reason. In my opinion though, WP is and always has been an easy interface to a powerful backend, MySQL. I've always used it as a starting point to create apps or tools or sites or functionality without having to start the code completely from scratch. WP has become so bloated in recent years though, that I don't bother anymore. I'd need to tear out half the crap before getting started just to make it moderately useful anymore. Having worked with software developers for the last decade, I have learned that you cannot ever go with their timeline, and a fixed cost project has a 95% probability of failing, especially if the payment plan is based on some form of advance and milestone payments. They will lose interest before the final payment, which can be between 10 to 25%. What has worked for me is the following. Creating a product vision, creating user stories. Create mock-ups. Ask them how many sprints will it take? Sprint is usually 2 weeks only. Pay for the first sprint advance. Be available always for any explanation on a user story. The goal of every sprint should be to show you a demonstratable feature. Once it is developed, it should also be bug-free and be deployed on your server. This will take care of any unseen deployment costs later. Last sprint should be the release sprint. Pay the final amount after the release sprint has been thoroughly tested by users or early adapters at your end. I wish you the best of luck. What made you choose Java for a web application? It's not a traditional choice for modern web development, where languages like PHP, JavaScript, Ruby and Python dominate. That's what the developers are suggesting to build in. They seem to really understand what we are trying to achieve. Their proposal is very detailed and they clearly understand us. I originally suggest Raw, but their developer is better at Java apparently. From the Googling I did, it seemed that Java was a pretty good solution and a lot of big apps are built on it. These are their proposed payment terms. I've not asked any of the below questions yet, they've given me this detail without being asked. 30% down payment, 30% middle stage of the project TBD, 40% upon handover. I'd imagine 40% on completion will keep them motivated. They have also said that they will build on their dev server, but they will also deploy it to our own server at each stage. What would be their first milestone? Do they build the UX and pages first? Will they do it page by page? My concern at the moment is, what do we class as middle stage of the project? Although they have written to be decided, so they are quite flexible. Java is bloated, slow, and takes longer to develop, as compared to something like Node.js. They're just pitching you what they know. Bootstrap is good for your front end, however. Java is listed, but don't be fooled. None of them use it to run their core platform. They should build out the base functionality, with minimal UI for testing, first. I'd also classify this as middle stage. That way, they're not wasting time polishing it, only to have you change your mind and pivot. Have you ever thought of a hybrid platform like Ionic etc., that way you can easily convert it into apps for iOS and Android as well as being a web app? There's mixed feedback and data about it, and some says it slows it down, but to be honest, I have used an app made in it, and the beauty is that it's future-proof for any code changes and language updates, unlike native apps that have to be devved for each platform and updated with new OS iterations etc. I am not a dev, it's just my understanding when looking for devs for some project ideas I have. I've agreed with a different developer. The app build starts on Monday. Django backend, Angular frontend, Stripe for payments or subscriptions, Intercom for user engagement or onboarding, Spark Post for emails, DigitalOcean for hosting. Integrated with Xero to keep track of accounting for the payments. It's happening. Thanks for the advice from everyone in this thread. That's more like it. You won't be disappointed going with Python over Java.